On the morning of this Thursday, a Venezuelan plane carrying hundreds of kilos of narcotics crashed into a reservoir while trying to flee from two fighter jets. The Caribbean has turned into the stage for a showdown that's changing drug routes around the world, and because of that, scenes like this are going to get more and more common. Planes and boats belonging to cartels moving along different routes and getting intercepted by several nations. But what's at stake isn't just control of the routes, it's regional or even global stability. To grasp the scale of what we're seeing, we need to go back to early September 2024. President Donald Trump personally announced that American military forces carried out a lethal strike against a vessel suspected of transporting drugs, killing 11 people in international waters in the Caribbean. The official target, members of Tren de Aragua, which Trump labeled narco-terrorists. But the Venezuelan response was immediate and calculated. Two Venezuelan fighter jets flew over U.S. Navy ships in the Caribbean Sea just 2 days after the strike, in a maneuver the Pentagon condemned as highly provocative. It was the kind of move we hadn't seen since the Cold War. The escalation didn't stop there. The United States deployed 10 F-35 fighters to Puerto Rico specifically to support operations against drug cartels, while Nicolas Maduro ordered a military buildup in 5 strategic states in northern Venezuela. We were watching two powers positioning themselves for a confrontation that goes way beyond a simple anti-drug operation. Here we get to the heart of the matter. Tren de Aragua isn't just another drug cartel. It's one of the fastest-growing criminal organizations in Latin America in recent years. It was born inside the Venezuelan prison system, more specifically at Tocaron Penitentiary, where its leaders built a literal city. Inside the prison, complete with a zoo, restaurants, and even a casino. What makes this organization particularly dangerous is its ability to adapt and expand. Taking advantage of Venezuelan migration flows, the group managed to set up operational cells in Peru, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, Brazil, and even the United States. In Chicago and New York, authorities have already identified Tren de Aragua members involved in kidnappings, human trafficking, and homicides. But here's where the story gets truly worrying. In 2024, the U.S. government officially sanctioned Tren de Aragua as a transnational criminal organization, citing its involvement in illegal mining, drug trafficking, kidnappings, and extortion. Unlike other cartels, this group isn't limited to narco-trafficking. It operates like a parallel state in several regions. The organization runs on a decentralized cell structure, which makes it extremely hard to dismantle. Each cell operates with relative independence, but they all answer to a central leadership that remains protected inside Venezuela. U.S. investigators estimate the group moves hundreds of millions of dollars annually, funds that get reinvested in heavy weaponry, bribing officials, and territorial expansion. But now we get to the most controversial part of this story. What makes the situation in Venezuela unique is that we're not just talking about a cartel operating inside the country. We're talking about evidence that high-ranking government officials might be directly involved in narco-trafficking. The term Cartel de los Soles came up in 1993 when two Venezuelan National Guard generals, Ramon Guillen and Orlando Hernandez Villegas, were investigated for drug trafficking crimes. The name comes from the sun symbols on Venezuelan generals' insignia, and according to U.S. analysts, it represents a network of high-ranking military officers involved in narco-trafficking since the 2000s. The U.S. Treasury Department went even further in July 2025, officially sanctioning the Cartel de los Soles as a criminal organization led by Nicolas Maduro Moros and other high-ranking individuals of the Maduro regime who have corrupted Venezuela's governmental institutions, including parts of the military and intelligence apparatus. The implications are devastating. If these accusations are true, it means we're not dealing with criminals acting against the Venezuelan state, but with criminals who are the state itself. Diosdado Cabello, considered the second most influential figure in Venezuela, was sanctioned by OFAC in 2018 for personally profiting from extortion, money laundering, and embezzlement. In practice, the accusation is serious. If state authorities help, protect, or profit from smuggling, then just arresting the trafficking soldiers won't solve it. U.S. sanctions and designations, which place the Cartel de los Soles on the list of high-risk organizations, reinforce this suspicion and complicate the diplomatic and military equation. When the line between state and crime gets blurred, the solution can't just be military. It needs deep investigation and international cooperation. Nicolas Maduro hasn't stayed quiet in the face of American accusations and military actions. His response has been carefully calculated, blending shows of military force with diplomatic appeals that seem contradictory. The Venezuelan government categorically denies any link to Tren de Aragua, claiming it dismantled the group in 2023 and calling it a fiction created by the international media. Maduro goes further, alleging Tren de Aragua is part of a conspiracy backed by the United States to justify military interventions. But actions tell a different story than words. In direct response to U.S. military operations, Maduro ordered a reinforcement of Venezuelan troops in 5 strategic states in the north of the country: Zulia, Falcon, Miranda, La Guaira, and Anzo Ataguay. These states control the main sea and air routes to the Caribbean, exactly the areas where drug trafficking is most intense. The military movement wasn't just symbolic. Satellite images show a significant increase in the presence of Venezuelan anti-air systems and naval patrols in the Caribbean. At the same time, Maduro made multiple appeals for dialogue with Trump, insisting he prefers to resolve issues through diplomatic channels instead of military confrontations. This duality reveals the delicate position Maduro is in. He needs to show strength to keep internal credibility, but he can't provoke a military escalation that Venezuela clearly can't win against the United States. Here we get to one of the most worrying consequences of this whole military operation. When you squeeze one point in narco-trafficking, the problem doesn't disappear, it moves. And Brazil is feeling that firsthand. The most emblematic case happened right when American operations ramped up. An aircraft coming from Venezuela illegally entered Brazilian airspace and was intercepted by Brazilian Air Force fighters. What happened next sounds like a movie scene. The pilot, realizing he'd be forced to land, ditched the plane into a reservoir and swam away. Inside the aircraft, authorities found 380 kilos of pure cocaine. This incident wasn't a one-off. Narco-trafficking experts explain that when a traditional route gets too risky, cartels adapt fast. The increased American military presence in the Caribbean is forcing Tren de Aragua and other organizations to seek alternative routes. More clandestine flights, more small, fast boats, and greater use of third countries as bridges to other continents. Brazil, with its vast Amazon border with Venezuela and thousands of kilometers of coastline, has become a natural target for these new routes. But doesn't stop there. There are growing reports of Tren de Aragua activity in Brazilian ports, especially in the northeast, where the organization is trying to set up partnerships with local factions to facilitate the international transport of drugs. Looking ahead, we've got 3 main scenarios taking shape, and they aren't mutually exclusive. Elements of each can happen at the same time. The first scenario is controlled containment. Trump is considering multiple options for military strikes against cartels operating in Venezuela, potentially including targets inside the country itself. If this strategy stays in international waters and focuses on very specific targets, we could see a controlled tension situation where the United States continues interdiction operations while Venezuela responds with calculated shows of force, but both sides avoid an escalation that could lead to open conflict. The second scenario is the most dangerous: escalation by incident. Every interception, every overflight, every military operation increases the chances of a fatal mistake. Picture a Venezuelan fighter that gets too close to a U.S. ship or a civilian vessel mistaken for traffickers. A single miscalculated incident could turn this tension into something far more serious. The third scenario, which is already happening, is the displacement of the problem. Criminal organizations are like water. They find the path of least resistance. With the Caribbean turning into a high-risk zone, we're seeing an uptick in land routes through Colombia and Brazil, maritime routes along South America's Atlantic coast, and even attempts to set up air bridges to West Africa. This isn't a story that only affects Americans and Venezuelans. What we're seeing is a full-on reorganization of global narco-trafficking routes, and that has implications for all of Latin America. Tren de Aragua has already established significant operations in at least 10 countries. In Peru, they control several illegal gold mining operations that serve both for money laundering and to finance their activities. In Colombia, they've formed strategic partnerships with FARC dissidents, combining narco-trafficking expertise with territorial know-how. In Chile and Ecuador, they've infiltrated strategic ports, easing the international transport of cocaine. But here's what makes everything even more complex. Unlike traditional cartels focused only on narco-trafficking, Tren de Aragua runs multiple criminal activities at once. They control human trafficking networks that exploit Venezuelan migrants, run kidnapping and extortion schemes, and even dabble in cybercrime and financial fraud. This criminal diversification makes the organization extremely resilient. Even if American military operations manage to significantly impact their drug routes, the group can keep operating through other illicit activities. It's a challenge that goes way beyond what a traditional military operation can solve. Talking to international security analysts, the opinion is practically unanimous. This situation is unprecedented in the region. Never before have the United States conducted such direct, lethal military operations against criminal organizations in international waters near South America. The American strategy seems to have multiple goals. Officially, it's about fighting narco-trafficking. But geopolitical analysts point out there's clearly a political dimension, pressuring the Maduro regime by weakening its alleged illicit funding sources. If the accusations about the Cartel de los Soles are true, attacking drug trafficking is, indirectly, attacking the financial structure of the Venezuelan government. The timing doesn't look like a coincidence either. Trump is implementing a much more aggressive policy toward Venezuela than his predecessor. The combination of military pressure in the Caribbean, expanded economic sanctions, and diplomatic support for the Venezuelan opposition suggests a coordinated strategy to force political change in Caracas. But there are significant risks to this approach. Latin America experts warned that excessive military pressure could push Maduro to seek support from U.S. adversaries like Russia, China, or Iran. There are already reports of Russian military advisors operating in Venezuela, and an escalation could justify greater foreign military presence in the region. We're witnessing the start of a new era in the fight against international organized crime. The United States' willingness to use lethal military force against cartels marks a fundamental shift in anti-drug strategy, which historically relied on police cooperation and intelligence operations. Operations in the Caribbean are having immediate effects. Seizures are up, traditional routes have been disrupted, and criminal organizations are being forced to spend more on security instead of expansion. But the side effects are rippling across the region. The case of the plane intercepted in Brazil is just the beginning. As Caribbean routes get more dangerous, we can expect a rise in criminal activity along alternative routes. Countries like Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and even nations in West Africa could become focal points of this criminal reorganization. The big question that remains is it possible to effectively fight organizations like Tren de Aragua and the alleged Cartel de los Soles using only military force? Historical experience suggests that as long as the conditions that let these organizations thrive remain poverty, institutional corruption, weak states, new criminal groups will pop up to fill the gaps left by the old ones. The showdown in the Caribbean may be just beginning, and its consequences will stretch far beyond the waters where the first missiles were fired.